to today's recovery meeting. It is the 15th of November, 2022, and today's discussion is going to be on boundaries and how, and specifically, how we can set boundaries while still being respectful and kind. And how we hold our boundaries while still being respectful and kind. Because boundaries are important. But boundaries themselves fall in a bunch of different categories. You have emotional, you have physical, you have financial boundaries, you have sexual boundaries, you have property boundaries, you have material boundaries, you have non-negotiable boundaries. Now, most of those are relatively self-explanatory, but the two that most people focus on in recovery is personal boundaries and our non-negotiable ones, because our non-negotiable ones in recovery is where lots of us put all of our boundaries as a non-negotiable. Non-negotiable boundaries are non-negotiable boundaries. These are the things that are absolutely must-haves to feel safe. To feel safe. So in my relationship with my partner, my non-negotiable boundary in communication is that you don't yell at me. You don't yell at me. You want to have a conversation with me? We'll talk. I am not speaking with you if you are yelling at me. That is a non-negotiable boundary in any of my relationships, whether they are intimate ones or platonic or work-related, business as in customer and being a client base, it doesn't matter. If you yell at me or you speak to me derogatory, I don't speak with you. I had a $400 order come into my business and I turned it away because he spoke negative to me. You will not speak to me that way. It doesn't matter. It is a non-negotiable. But let's talk about personal boundaries, because in our recovery, this is where we are learning what exactly our boundaries are and how we can have our boundaries while still respecting other people, because lots of times we are the people pleaser. And so we allow our boundaries to get muddled and even wiped away completely to make others happy. And that is dangerous. But a personal boundary is simply the lines we draw for ourselves in terms of our level of comfort around others. Physical contact, verbal interactions, personal space, whether we allow something to happen with our children. Hey, my boundary is that you don't drink around my children. That's my boundary. And it has nothing to do with me as a person. It has to do with the safety of my children. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to these boundaries, most of the time in our lives, the reason why we struggle with boundaries is the fact that as a child, we were told, you can't tell Aunt Ann that you don't want to give them a hug. It's rude. Go give your grandmother a hug. They came so far to see you. You must shake hands with somebody when you meet them. Well, if my boundary is that I don't shake hands and I fist bump because I don't shake hands, that's my boundary. My personal safety is that I don't grip my hands with you, that I don't grip hands. In fact, I met someone the other day like that. They don't shake. They fist bump or they use their side of their arms. Well, as everybody else is shaking, I witnessed this and I watched someone get upset. And my brain went, why are we getting upset over something as simple as I changed my arm for that person? Because we're taught that it's rude. We're taught that our boundaries don't matter over other people's, or our boundaries are the only thing that matters. It's remembering that our boundaries are just as important as the person that we're having a conversation with or we're having an interaction with. Now, do we believe that you have to communicate our boundaries for them to exist? Do we have to communicate? Or can they exist without being communicated?
Well, how would they be recognized if it's not?
I didn't ask if they could be recognized. The question is, for boundaries to exist, do they have to be communicated? Do you have to communicate your boundaries for you to be uncomfortable that the boundary got crossed?
No. First time.
No.
It can be broken. It can be crossed without knowledge. Ignorance can be forgiven.
Yes, but the big thing that the people that are like, look at what we were discussing just now. The immediate thought process is you can't have boundaries if they're not spoken, because how do I know that the boundary is there?
You just can't be offended by some things that aren't typical boundaries.
So I look at it this way. Has anybody ever been to the country and walked down a hill and that path crosses county line? It's the same trail, but the trail crosses county line. Well, it's now changed over a boundary, but 9 out of 10 times there's not a fence at that boundary line. There's a sign about a mile before that says you're about to enter the county, and all of a sudden you're in the county. Or when you're fishing, if you fish the Texas-Oklahoma River, or the lake up there, the Texas-Oklahoma Lake, halfway in the middle of that lake, it becomes Oklahoma. You have to have a different fishing license to fish that part of the lake. But it's an invisible boundary. The boundary still exists.
Lake Tahoe is a perfect example, actually.
Absolutely.
More notable example of Nevada, California side of the lake.
Yep.
And I've never even interacted with it. I just know that there's that boundary of the gambling on one side and the cannabis was on the other for a long time. You had the lake was the jumping point for getting cannabis to the casinos.
But it was because the boundary is invisible. It's not a solid boundary. There's no door to get in there. There's no person I have to speak to cross that boundary. Literally, those are the boundaries where you can be in literally 2 places at once. Because they're not physical.
I didn't catch the at once part. You want a better example of that? The states of the 4 squares. There is literally one spot in between Arizona and New Mexico, and whichever fucking 4 of them is, you can stand in all 4 states at once.
Yep. So, how do you think? So, if I were to tell you that there are 4 steps in approaching emotional boundaries with other people and having to talk about it, what would you say those 4 steps would be, based on your own interactions in life when you're trying to talk about your emotional boundaries and personal boundaries?
Are
usually have to open up and talk about it.
But how do you do that? So you've had an argument, right? It's crossed a boundary of some sort. The line gets said, we'll talk about it later. How do we bring up that conversation? How do we do it respectfully? There are 4 easy steps to do it. If you were to think, what would you say those 4 steps would be?
Negotiate a time and a place. Cool.
What?
So negotiate a time and a place.
Negotiating a time and a place. Okay.
Setting an expectation.
So you would approach the person. Because in order to negotiate, you would have to break the silence. So
Yeah.
we've all calmed down. Make sure everybody is calm. If you approach that person and you can physically see that they're not calm, it's okay to take another step back and give them a few more minutes. It's logical, because if they were coming to you to talk about something and you needed a few more minutes and that person doesn't give it, our normal reaction is to scream at them and just say, I need a few more minutes. So remember your feelings and the way you would want someone to handle the situation. It's not easy all the time. I still work on it. I'm still not perfect. But go ahead.
Yes, I'm not continuing this conversation until you can speak.
Ask to speak about that situation. Ask if they're okay to speak about that situation. Ask them to be honest when they answer that question. Because you know that it's a subject that there are multiple emotions, because the last time the subject happened, the emotions got heated. This is the big part, and this is the part where people struggle. You must own your part in the miscommunication. You have to own where you messed up in the situation. So if it means that you yelled back because your boundary had been crossed, you have to state that. You have to state that I messed up by yelling, or I messed up by doing this. The other day, my husband and I got into it, and we got into bed, and I looked at him, and I had said some really mean and nasty things. And I had to apologize for what I had said. Whether what I had said was in response to what he had said. Well, if you had never called me this, I would have never done this, isn't what I'm talking about. Because we cannot control other people's behaviors, cannot control other people's words in situations. We control how we respond when our boundaries are crossed, how we respond when people get close to those boundaries. Do we tell them that they're close to those boundaries? Do we tell them that, hey, today's a day that we're struggling, and I need you to be aware that I'm already struggling today? For those of us who struggle with not just addiction, but mental health. Today's a good day with my addiction. I'm not having any cravings. I'm good. However, mental health wise, today is a day I'm struggling. Today has been 14 years since my grandfather died, and the thought process of whether I'm making him proud or not is a big one. Sorry, dropped my phone. And then after we own our part, we have to tell them what we're not okay with from their behaviors. And this is the empowering part of this. Because part of your boundary is to state what I will and will not tolerate anymore, what I will and will not allow to enter into my space to protect my peace, my sanity, and my serenity, my recovery. Not that your recovery doesn't matter if that person's in recovery, not that that person's mental health doesn't matter. But at some point, you over me, my place is to make sure I'm safe because I can't make sure anybody else is safe if I'm not safe. So at the end of the day in recovery, the person we have to make sure that is in the right place is us. We have to tell them what we're not okay with and that we need, and that what we need from them is to respect this line when they're going to engage with us. So for my mother doesn't get to talk to me like I'm a child anymore when she speaks to me. She will respect the fact that I am an adult and I have my own children. Or we will not speak because I will not be treated like a child anymore. So has there been something in the last week in which you thought you handled your boundary correctly, but looking back on it, there may have been a way that you could have handled it a little nicer?
I do have something to say, but give me a moment. He's kind of.
Or if it's one where you're like, hey, that's a situation that just happened and I handled it that way. It worked.
What if it's hard for you to communicate said boundaries because of your past, because of, well, you're just toxic, so we don't want to freaking hear it. So therefore, you can't open up about your said boundaries.
So when I went through that, I had to start by writing my boundaries out. And I wrote them in 2 categories.
That's smart. I should do that.
That was it. Negotiable and non-negotiable. What were my non-negotiable boundaries? Like, you don't get to put your hands on me. You don't get to call me names that aren't mine.
Because like a big one for me the other day was when I was going live, had someone go in there and he was using my honorific, okay? Without asking, just kept calling me baby girl and all this other stuff. And it was driving me up the wall. And I finally had enough. And instead of calmly saying, you know, can you not call me that? You don't, I did not consent to you doing that. It was, don't flipping call me that again. And then it was like, afterwards I messaged him privately and I was like, look, I'm sorry, but that's a touchy situation with me. And it still is.
You have to be careful.
And then there's times I'm just like, I'll just let it go because I don't know how to talk about it.
You have to be careful with the I'm sorry, but.
So we talk about it in therapy and in recovery as sandwiching. So thank you for the compliment. However, I really need you to not call me that. For whatever reason.
Also remember
I appreciate you popping into my lives. Please just respect it. That's a way to do it where you're not coming across rude, holding to your boundary. But I'd like to hear what AJ has to say.
Yeah, I feel like I have a little bit of a different take on that. Because I want to also push the fact of the matter that it is not your responsibility to feel like you have to provide a reason as to why. You don't need to justify why you have the boundary that you have, just that you have
No. But I don't think she was apologizing. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think she was apologizing for the boundary. I think she was apologizing for the snap that happened because the boundary that wasn't spoken got crossed.
Yeah, no, what I was referencing was the I'm sorry I snapped on you, but like
Yeah.
where I'm getting with that is this is why I have that boundary. Like, don't feel like you have to justify it if you don't want to.
You can just say, I'm sorry I snapped at you. I need you to not use that when you speak with me. That's all you have to say.
And if they ask you you're not comfortable, state, I'm glad that you asked me that, but I don't feel comfortable answering.
And that's that boundary of communication, of when you're comfortable in speaking and who you're comfortable in speaking.
Like there's certain boundaries that I have with my brother that granted he intentionally crossed, but that there's been multiple times that he's been like, well, why? And I'm like, I don't need to have a why. I have my own why, and that's not for you to know if I don't feel comfortable telling you.
So the only time I will tell you to be careful with that is if you always use, you don't have to know why I have my boundaries. When you have interpersonal relationships, when you are allowing people in, you have to be willing to discuss somewhat of your why you have these boundaries so people can understand you as a person. So when somebody else crosses your boundary, like if I'm in a live with Pika and somebody has crossed that boundary and Pika asked them to stop, it is my job as her friend to help her enforce that boundary. That's why we have moderators. That's why we have those things, is to enforce our boundaries. When we're unable, keywords there, unable to enforce them ourselves, do not depend on people to enforce your boundaries for you. Boundaries are a very I don't want to use the word selfish, but it almost appears to be a very selfish thing. Because at the end of the day, the only one who can hold you to your boundary is you. Nobody else can hold me to my boundaries.
It is a selfish thing. Boundaries are meant to be selfish. It is literally a mode of self-preservation. Now, should it be felt in a guilty context of being selfish? No. But under in you know a stance of empathy and for your own personal well-being, having that boundary is not a selfish thing. It's a self-preservation.
So we all have a really good idea of what our boundaries are and where we could hold them a little tighter. But
not me, but okay.
Let's talk about the real life fear of holding our boundaries while in recovery.
Pause. I have
Yep.
a comment to read. Selfishness is necessary for self-preservation. The reason airlines still say mask yourself first is so you don't suffocate helping someone else. Exactly. And they're talking about that's not the political masking. They're talking about the air mask. Just for
Yeah.
just for safety.
If we have a situation where we hit turbulence and the masks come down, mask yourself first.
Right.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the fears of holding to our boundaries or even setting boundaries for those of us who really had no boundaries and were always the yes person and always the I'll be there. The fear of setting these boundaries is normal, but remember that boundaries are important for everyone. Everyone. Boundaries keep everybody safe.
I find that I only have fear of setting boundaries with certain people because other people I'm really good at setting boundaries with. And then there's like the few that I'm like, you terrify me, and I don't know how to communicate my boundary to you because I feel like it's not going to be respected anyway.
Yeah.
My
So hold on. So how do we deal with that fear to still keep us safe?
Typically, my go-to because I mean, and this isn't
oh my
possible for everyone. I'm generally a person. I keep people around me at all times. I don't go places by myself, and
Mhm.
so for me, it's the people that I'm with know what my boundary is, and in moments that sometimes I'm completely unable of communicating that boundary, either out of fear or being nonverbal or whatever it may be, that it helps to have somebody there with me that knows my boundary that can help me communicate it in a different way.
Okay. How does everybody else deal with these fears?
Nugget said, I was afraid of inconveniencing someone else. I worried my boundaries would create a situation I wasn't safe to be in.
And I can attest to that. That is the root of Nugget 8101 in the beginning with me and Nugget. Like that whole statement was the root of building Nugget's trust in me, was knowing and making her confident that it was never an inconvenience to me. Coming, going, backwards, forward. She didn't have a boundary as far as keeping herself comfortable that we expected
But that was
expectations.
her bound.
Well, from
But
us,
base.
bad word,
Well,
bad word,
yeah.
bad word. She didn't have an expectation from us to keep a certain level. That's what I'm backwards thinking.
But her boundary in being able to trust that and be able to trust you was that you let her come and go as she needed. That's her boundary. Is the person who holds too tight makes her afraid. So if you hold too tight as a person, if I'm understanding correctly,
We're getting a response.
um, it causes that fear of my boundary of I have to be able to come and go because of what I deal with.
And that's almost a verbatim from what I've heard from her directly to me. So yeah, most important need I have. It's honestly the most important need I have. I need the right to leave and leave safely, or I can't come back. Right? Yeah, exactly. I get
Yep.
it.
So how do Zach, Onyx, Pika, Bree, how do any of you guys deal with these fears?
I stay at a constant fucking angry mode and just ready to explode whenever something does happen. I don't really set boundaries for anybody. I don't say anything to anybody, and I just let whatever happens happens. And
So how can we help you start setting safe boundaries?
I don't know, because I don't know how I would enforce anything.
Okay. So if you had to think Do you have any non-negotiable boundaries? Like if something happens either around you or to you that you're gone. That if that one thing happens, I'm gone and I leave. Is there any non-negotiable that you can pinpoint?
Let's say the moment I say you were actually here when we started hanging out, the moment I did something, what would that be? What would be that thing that would make you just okay? I'm out. I don't trust you anymore. I gotta go. Or in your case,
Whether it's
or even maybe in your case, flip to the anger reaction side and start being violent because you think I'm the threat, and it be the other way instead of the escape.
So usually,
talking about my family and stuff like that.
That's
okay.
There we are. Right.
So usually non-negotiables include safety issues like physical violence, emotional abuse, drug or alcohol use, fidelity issues, infidelity issues, life-threatening health issues, the safety of something or someone that you truly care about. For us animal lovers, where your pet is your only thing, if I trust you with my animal and I'm gone and I come back and my animal's messed up, that's my non-negotiable. You're no longer in my friend circle. It's done. If I can't trust you, if I thought I could trust you with my dog and I come back and my dog is in worst case, that is a non-negotiable. You are no longer allowed to touch me.
There better be a damn good explanation there.
Because
why did my baby get hurt?
My non-negotiables are that the things that I spend my life making sure are okay, stay okay when I'm not there, when you have them, is a complete non-negotiable. Whether it is 2 legs or 4 legs, it doesn't matter. Because they can't care for themselves. When I go out with my friends, my non-negotiable is that there is no drug use. If I walk around the corner and a couple of the people I went out with are on the corner doing a bump, I'm on my phone and I'm making a phone call and someone's coming to get me because I'm gone. We have Tony, that is to you. But the other one reads, a boundary system that I have with my kids is I don't like being touched, hugged without asking. So we have a communication bracelet, stoplight system that I wear to help the kids know when they can or can't touch me. They don't touch at all with the red bracelet. They ask to touch with the yellow, and then they can just randomly give hugs and stuff with the green. And that's a beautiful system. I mean, it sounds silly, but if you ever watch dog trainers that rehabilitate dogs, it's a very similar system. The red one is don't come up. The yellow is, hey, use caution, we're still training. The green one is they're not going to bite, they're friendly. And it's a very similar system when it comes to us and our boundaries are being crossed. With, hey, this boundary I'm okay with. This boundary we can play with a little bit. Like, I'm going somewhere. And like the best one. I went to a concert.
Yep. Well,
I don't drink.
Let me stop you. Because
Go ahead.
KJ actually typed out a better one, guaranteed. Because I was there for that. Actually, it was in my live. So, example he points out is it was in my box. KJ was in my box. She was in my box, and it was my live. And I actually know exactly who it was. Another caregiver of another frequent flyer little that comes through came in and thought she was gonna just talk to my kiddos like they just anybody's kiddos. And even before I could, because I stepped up and went like, hey, whoa. And about that third, whoa, here comes my, hey, bitch, that's my kid.
But I was respectful about it.
Yeah, you were. You were definitely more respectful than I just made it seem. Right? Yeah, wasn't that right? I would
had
if I had to say more than I did, then I was going to be more worried.
Had it continued, there would have been a much different interaction. But you're right. That's a boundary.
And then there again, not only that, like and the reason I made sure I pointed this one out because I can actually get in on this. It was my live, and you know, not only is this somebody else's kiddo, it's not even your box. What the fuck are you doing? Coming into my house playing around.
Yeah.
My house
and so it's one where well, it's kind of like the one where okay.
Hold on, let me joke here behind it. He said, "What? KJ's a puppy, not the community. Where's my spray bottle and newspapers?"
Here's this one. Okay, in my home we eat with forks. In my best friend's home, they eat everything with chopsticks. So, in their home, the boundary in their home is that there is no forks. So, to respect that boundary, I learned to use chopsticks. If my boundary is I'm only going to use a fork to eat,
and here I've even got a better one.
There's this respect, and it's one where everybody's home is different, so you respect, and it's remembering that it is okay to say no. So if you don't think you can respect someone's boundary, like I was pregnant with my son, my husband was headed to go see my stepdaughter. I did not believe I could respect the boundary of somebody else's home. So I did not go with him. He went to go see his kid alone. I did not go with him because I was not going to disrespect somebody's home with the mood I was in that day. So it was okay for me to say, honey, I'm not going.
Somebody do one of those.
Yep. I tend not to reinforce my boundaries and ignore them when they get crossed. And then I didn't know being allowed to leave safely was a boundary until recently. I didn't know what it was like before recently. And those are the best ones when we realize what our boundaries are and coming into them and learning that it is okay to have that boundary to keep us safe. It is okay to need that extra space. But I want to discuss something because I had mentioned this at the very beginning. How to do this with kindness. Keep the focus on your feelings and your needs. Not so much that you do this and then I won't do this. This is what I need from you. These are my feelings at the moment. It's not an easy task. I know it is hard. Be direct with what your needs are. You know that person that's always wishy-washy with their needs and you never really know? It's always the hardest. So be direct with what your needs are. Be specific. That one's more directed on, so like when I'm having a really bad day, I call my husband and tell him I'm needing a drink. Well, that could be anything. It could be a bottled soda, it could be a can, it could be a beer, it could be a fountain drink. So I'm very specific when it comes to what I need for a drink. Hey, I need a large fountain drink with a lot of ice in a straw, because that helps calm my brain down. It slows me down enough. Use a neutral tone of voice. Don't allow your emotions to control where your voice goes. Remember that if you make them have to listen to you, and you slow yourself down into a very neutral tone. They honestly have to listen to the words.
My number one boundary is this. I don't care if you give me a hug, okay? But I don't like you hugging me and then just staying there. It makes me feel like I can't breathe. It makes me feel like I don't want to be touched.
So
I don't like being held too long.
So have you tried giving one-armed hugs?
I have.
Where even if the person does two arms around you, you one arm, so that way when you have to let go, you have the ability to step back?
I tried that, and they wrapped their arm around both arms.
And at that point, you gotta throw
And
your elbows out. You just
that at that point, you have to set the boundary of I do one-armed hugs.
Yeah, that's the
Because if your boundary is I need to be able to step back, like I give my hug, here I give my one arm hug, and even if I pulled this one in and then I let go again, so it's still the one arm, if I let go, I have to be able to turn. If I have to remove both hands, it's really easy for them to grab both arms again. I just don't come back. Oh no, I don't. There's only a few more topics. So we've discussed a neutral tone. Now it's choosing the right time. We've discussed that a little bit today. How do we know when it is the right time?
When both parties are calm.
Okay.
I mean, honestly, I've never known when the right time was. I just say it right then and there. Hey, this is bugging me. I need you to stop. And it's never been.
But like, I guess for me, it's difficult because with a specific person in my life, both parties are never calm. Because I can be calm, but he's just always perpetually angry.
So the right time is actually a really hard thing to learn because the right time for you may not be the right time for the other person. Uh-huh. It's when I'm calm, is the other person calm? Is the other person in the middle of doing something? Are they about to walk out the door? Do we have to look at each other and schedule the right time? And that's an okay thing to do. It is okay to look at the other person and be like, okay, I understand that you're not ready right now. I won't be ready when you will be. Can we discuss this at this point in time? Try not to make it more than 48 hours after the incident. 24 is 24 is ideal. 48 is the max. Going to bed upset with somebody or having something unresolved. Um, Yep. But at that point in time, those are your boundaries because of your specific issues. And that's why, remember that when I give time frames, guys, these are minimum and max times. Whatever people say, whatever is comfortable for you and the person in that situation. So I handle things differently with my children than I would the children across the way. Or I handle things differently with each and every single one of you, even if it was the same situation, because Tony will be ready at a separate time than KJ would be, or
This is my
Onyx
psych
would
office.
be.
Hold on. Y'all go ahead.
Where
Um,
I'm a person that
Hello?
I need it to be approached fairly quickly. Otherwise, I'll fester out.
Yes, ma'am.
yeah.
Yeah, we're
Here's the question.
tomorrow, right?
Say the person.
Yeah, we got one tomorrow, right?
You
Go
get in
ahead.
a fight, and this has happened to me a lot. You get in a fight with someone, and you're not at ease
Hold
with
on, my
the
headset died.
situation. You try and confront them, and then they act like it never freaking happened.
That's
It never freaking happened. And if you bring it up, then it turns into a blowout fight, and it's just World War I all over again. And then in your head, it's World War III because like, okay, we were calm.
So
I opened my mouth. Now it's World War III.
hold on. So at that, hold on. Are you doing in house for what? I'd prefer you to go in and actually let them see the physical responses that are happening. I would prefer you to go in with the way today handled for you. So at that point in time, I resort to journaling the situation, how I handled it, what the situation was, how I handled it, and what I could have done differently. Knowing that I cannot control somebody else's response, knowing that I cannot control what somebody else says or how somebody else remembers the situation. It is again taking back control of what I have done and say.
definitely have a big conversation.
I cannot account for, hold on, I cannot account for a time even on my best days, but I'll try to approach others faster than several months or years. Can we please ask that speakers not cover? I'm sorry, baby. Um, so yeah, that was his specific doctor's appointment.
Because I knew that there would be so many with BPD and this boundaries issue being a big issue for all of us.
And it sounds funny out of the last 5 points that I've made, that the hardest of all of out of these 6 points of to do it with kindness and do it respecting other people is to consider that other person's emotions. Consider the way that you as an individual are coming to somebody and coming across to somebody. And that is the hardest one for people to do, especially if you're like me, because my tone will change without me knowing it. Literally, people will think I am angry and I'm just speaking, but my tone has changed and I haven't realized it, or my volume has changed and I don't realize it. So you, at that point in time, Bree, where you consider theirs over yours, you have to go back to point one. Keep focus on your feelings and your needs. Remember that this is what I'm feeling, and this is the need that wasn't met. This is the need that I need met when it comes to this or whatever. Look at it as a business relationship. When your boss comes to you and says that they need you to do something or they need something from you, you want them to be direct and clear. But we still want them to take into consideration my feelings about the task. Like, dude, don't come to me 2 hours before the end of the day and hand me a 5-hour project. Consider my feelings. But their feelings and their needs are that it needs to be done. So it's a balancing act. Boundaries are just that. It is balancing how to interact with people and keep yourself both physically, mentally, and emotionally safe.
Her reaction compared to my reaction, how different they are, because we both have different sets of boundaries.
I guess I can say I didn't realize things like that. Raw point one. Bree, I have all of this written down, and I will share those photos in Tuesday's recovery tab as well, so you guys can see my bullet points and my stuff for this meeting. I will also list the website in which dives into these boundaries and how to hold boundaries and how to set boundaries a lot more that my therapist gave me a few years ago. They have continued to re-up and redo and repost their boundaries, so that way it is now more up to date. It breaks down all the forms of boundaries and so people can understand. So I will post those links as well for everybody, so that way we can revisit this topic. If anybody in this meeting needs to discuss something after you read that you're like, wait, I don't understand, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Don't forget that it's going to be uploaded by the end of the day. This will be done on YouTube either tonight or in the morning. The links will be in the bio for that video as well. I'll make sure they're posted. So this whole will be rewatchable anytime you want.
It will be there. But I do need you to remember that even though boundaries is like walking a tightrope, there's the net beneath you, and it is your support system. If we make sure that our support system has no holes, our boundaries can be met when we voice them. You have to learn to find your voice. And it is okay if you don't know where it is right now. We are all learning. I promise you guys, there are days I do not have a voice to tell you when my boundary is crossed. I don't know how to. And then there are days where any boundary that gets crossed, I can voice. It's not perfect. And nobody here is asking you to be perfect. We're just wanting you to remember how to be safe in order to grow. And the seeds we sow in the winter that may freeze over, sprout in the spring and bloom beautiful flowers. Remember, it's okay to be in our cold season. The sun is coming.
I love it.
And if anybody doesn't have any burning desires with that, I'm going to end our meeting. Does anybody have anything they'd like to speak about?